Hi, this is Liam, your narrator here at Home Studio Stories. I just want to say thank you to all of you that are commenting, liking, subscribing, sharing, and of course, listening to the stories. If you have a story you want to send in, please do to homestudiohorror@gmail.com. Alright, let's get into the stories. The alleyway was poorly lit and stank of piss. A few people were milling around, but most had left already. "We found her," one of the cops said. When I saw what looked like a corpse lying on the ground, my stomach sank. She was young, beautiful, and dead. She'd been beaten and stabbed repeatedly. "Any witnesses?" I asked Officer Doyle. "Nah, none yet," he replied. I looked up. "What about the houses looking over the alleyway?" Doyle shook his head. "No one's seen nothing. She was found by a passerby around 8:30 while she was walking her dog." We started to canvass the area, knocking on doors and asking questions. It was a long shot, but we had to try. After a few hours of searching, we finally found a witness. An elderly man living in one of the nearby houses had seen a man lurking in the alleyway around the time of the murder. He didn't get a good look at the man, but did remember seeing a distinctive tattoo on his hand. A dragon with a skull for a head. We took the information back to the station and started running checks on anyone with a similar tattoo. It took a little time, but we eventually got a hit. The man with the tattoo was a known criminal, Jimmy Vance, with a history of violence. We brought him in for questioning, but he denied any involvement with the murder. Without any concrete evidence, we had no choice but to let him go. As I sat at my desk, frustration began to set in. We had a suspect, but no evidence. It was like chasing a ghost. I needed a breakthrough, something to connect the dots. Then my phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a call from a woman named Aisha claiming to have information about the murder. I asked her to come in for questioning and she agreed. When she arrived, I was surprised to see such a young woman, no older than 25. She looked nervous though, her hands shaking as she sat down across from me. "I saw something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw the killer." My heart raced as I leaned in. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath and began to speak. I was walking home from work when I saw him. He was tall, dark hair, beard, wearing a hoodie, face covered, but I saw his eyes. They were cold and lifeless. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was the first real description we had of the killer. "He was holding a knife," she continued. "I saw him stab her over and over again. She was screaming, begging for help, but no one came. I wanted to help, but I was too scared. I could see tears welling up in her eyes, and I knew this was hard for her." "Can you identify him?" I asked, hopeful. She nodded. "I think so. I saw his eyes, and I remember this tattoo he had on his hand, a skull with a dragon on it." My heart sank. It was the same tattoo as our suspect. As we left the interview room, I could see the relief on Officer Doyle's face. It looked like we finally had a break in the case. But when we went to arrest the suspect, something strange happened. As we pulled up to his house, he was outside waiting for us. He didn't resist, he didn't run, he just stood there calmly. As we led him to the car, I couldn't help but ask, "Why'd you do it?" He looked at me, his cold eyes lifeless. "I didn't." It was then that I realized something weren't right. The witness had been lying, and I think she'd given us false information, but why? I needed to find out the truth. So I asked the suspect to come in for questioning again. This time, I brought the witness in as well. I looked her dead in the eye. "Why'd you lie to us?" She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." "What do you mean?" I pressed. "I did see the real killer," she said, "but he threatened me. He said if I told anyone, he'd come after me." "You know him, don't you?" I asked. She nodded. "They're my brothers." They've been at it for years. It all made sense now. Her brothers. The real killer had framed his brother by getting a similar tattoo, knowing that it would lead us straight to him. I couldn't believe it. We'd been so close to letting the real killer go free, all because of a false witness and a family feud. But now we had the truth, and the real killer was behind bars. As I walked out of the station that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The case had been solved and justice had been served. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more cases out there like this one, with false witnesses and innocent people taking the fall. I made a promise to myself to be more vigilant and to never stop searching for the truth, because in the end, that's all that really mattered. Not just closing cases, but finding the real answers, no matter how difficult they may be to uncover. As I walked home that night, I knew no matter what, I would always strive to do just that, because that was my duty. I couldn't believe my luck when my boss told me that I was going on an all expenses paid vacation to Hawaii. I'd been working at the marketing firm for a few years, and this was the first time they'd offered me such a generous package. I couldn't wait to hit the beach and soak up the sun. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for: beach time, sightseeing, and delicious food. But on the fourth day of my trip, something strange happened. I went to bed in my hotel room, and when I woke up the next morning, my roommate was gone. I assumed she'd gone for an early morning swim, or had gone to grab breakfast. But when she didn't return after a few hours, I started to worry. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I went to the hotel reception and told them what had happened. They assured me that they would look out, but there was no sign of my roommate. Days passed now, and there was still no sign of her. I tried to enjoy the rest of my trip, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread. As my vacation came to an end, I made my way back home, hoping that my roommate would be there waiting for me. But when I got back to work, I couldn't believe my eyes. There she was, sitting at her desk, typing away at her computer like nothing had happened. I couldn't understand how it was possible. She'd been missing for days. I approached her and she looked up at me surprised. "Hey, where have you been? You've been out for days," she said. "What are you talking about?" I replied. "I've been on the holiday waiting for you to come back. You're the one who disappeared." "What?" she said. "I've been coming here to work every day like usual." I was completely confused. Had I imagined her disappearance, or even her being there? Had I dreamt the entire thing? But as I looked closer, I noticed something strange. Her skin was paler than usual, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I started to investigate, trying to find out what had happened. I talked to her family and friends, but they all said the same thing, that they'd seen her here every day or at home. I decided to hire a private investigator, but they couldn't find any evidence of any foul play. As the days went on, I started to notice something even stranger. My roommate would disappear for hours at a time, sometimes even the entire day, but every morning she would show up for work, looking more tired and sickly than before. One day, I decided to follow her. I trailed her to a remote part of the city where she entered a run-down apartment building. I waited outside, but she didn't come out for hours. Finally, she emerged and I confronted her. "What's going on? Where have you been? What are you doing in there?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I've been sick. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't remember anything and I don't know where I've been." It turns out, my roommate has been suffering from a rare medical condition that caused her to lose her memory and wander aimlessly. She had been showing up for work every day because it was the only thing she could remember how to do. Her family and friends had been covering for her, not wanting to cause any more stress. I was shocked and saddened by what had happened. It was a mystery that had a twist nobody could have predicted, but I was glad that my roommate was getting the help she needed and that she was able to live a somewhat normal life, even if she couldn't remember it. I woke up to a beautiful morning, birds chirping, sun shining and a light breeze in the air. I decided to take a stroll to my neighbour's house a few doors down and deliver a parcel that had been delivered to my house by mistake. As I walked down the street, I couldn't help but admire the beautiful homes and the picturesque neighbourhood. When I reached my neighbour's house, I rang the bell, but there was no answer. I decided to knock, but again, no answer. I thought it was strange as my neighbour was usually home at this time of day, so I called out his name, but no response. Suddenly I heard some noise coming from the backyard. I walked towards the back of the house and saw that the gate was slightly open, so I pushed it and walked into the backyard. That's when I saw him, my neighbour. He was lying on the ground, motionless. Immediately I called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They cordoned off the area and started their investigation. They asked me what happened, and I told them how I found my neighbour lying on the ground. They asked if I'd seen or heard anything suspicious, but I hadn't. The police questioned some of the other neighbours too, but nobody had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. They started to examine the crime scene, and that's when they found something strange. There were footprints leading away from the scene, but they didn't match my neighbour's. The police asked me to come down to the station and give a formal statement. They wanted to know every detail of my walk to my neighbour's house, and they asked me to describe the package I was delivering. They also asked me if I had any enemies or if I had any reason to harm my neighbour. I told them I didn't, and I couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt him. So they let me go. Days passed and the police couldn't find any suspects or any leads, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to my neighbour. So I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started by going to the delivery company that had delivered the package to my house by mistake. It took some pretty sweet talking, but the company provided me with the name and address of the person who had sent the package. I went to their house and they told me that they had sent the package to my neighbour because they were friends. They also told me that my neighbour had recently come into some money and was planning to move out of town. That's when it hit me. My neighbour had hit the big time, was planning to leave, and somebody had found out. They must have followed him to his house and killed him. I told the police my theory and they started to investigate. What they actually found out was that my neighbour had a business partner who had recently gone bankrupt, and he had owed my neighbour a lot of money. The partner had found out about my neighbour's plan to move and had killed him to stop him from leaving with the money. The killer was eventually caught and justice was served. I couldn't believe that such a thing could happen in our quiet little neighbourhood, but I learned that you never really know who your neighbours are or what they're involved in.